Hi Year 3, Mrs. Masuka here with your Lesson 16. We're already on to Lesson 16 of our line of inquiry. Wow, so we've been investigating lots of things and thinking a lot about how we can find out about people in the past. So today's Walt is we are learning to investigate historical sources. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see what would be on the board if we were at school. So just bear with me, let me find it. Here we go. Okay, so we are learning to investigate historical sources, and today we're going to be historians again. And remember that historians ask questions to investigate what life was like in the past. So what is a historical source? Well, in our last topic, where does the darkness come from? We were looking at sources, weren't we? But they were light sources. We were thinking about where light started from. And a historical source is something that tells us about history. So far in our line of inquiry, we've been looking at lots of different things that can give us information about the past. And those different things that can give us information about the past are called sources. So can you think now of any of the sources we've investigated, and you can say them to the screen, you don't need to write them down. Think about what have we used so far that's been able to tell us about the past. You might want to pause the video and talk to the screen and see what you can come up with. Okay, I'm going to move my slideshow on. These are some of the things that we've used so far that are historical sources. So we've had Victorian photographs of school. We were looking at some old paintings, historical paintings. We were looking at some photos of what Easton used to look like, the area of Bristol where Bannerman Road School is and where lots of you live. We were looking at some descriptions of what Boudica was like. And we were looking at Greenbank Cemetery, at the gravestones. They were historical sources that were telling us information about the past. So there are just some examples, and you might have thought of some more as well. So a historical source may be a document, a picture, it might be a sound recording, a book, might be a film or a television programme or a picture, or, oh, I've already said a picture, haven't I? Or a photograph, I meant, or an object. So any sort of artifact from the period in question that conveys, that gives information can qualify as a source. Okay, so anything that you've got that tells you about the past, that is your source of information. And there are two main types of historical sources. There are primary sources and secondary sources. That's what we're going to be learning today. So I'll say it, primary sources, you say it, and secondary sources. Good. So I've got some examples here of things that are primary sources and things that are secondary sources. So I want you to see if you can come up with a definition. If you think you can say what a primary source is and what a secondary source is by looking at the information below. So the example of some examples of a primary source would be a diary entry recalling events that were witnessed. So if somebody was there at the time and they've written a diary to say what it was like. It could be a letter telling someone about something that they saw happening. So if they actually witnessed it and they've written a letter about it, that would be a primary source. A photograph of an event, that would be a primary source. Or an artifact for example, a tool or a weapon from a particular time in history. All of those things are primary sources. What have they all got in common? Well, here are some examples of secondary sources. So a textbook written by a historian, that would be a secondary source. Someone retelling stories they were told by their grandparents, so the stories that are told over and over again, that would be a secondary source. An encyclopedia entry about a historical event. So something written down about the historical event. So if somebody's learned something and then they've written it down for you to read. An academic journal article written for pupils. What have all those things got in common? Is it primary sources or is it secondary sources that are written or taken from the event itself? And is it primary sources or secondary sources that seem to be written about the event from people that didn't actually witness it? There we are. Primary sources are original, first-hand accounts of an event, topic, or historical time period. Okay, so primary sources are from that historical time, or they are witness accounts, people that were actually there saying exactly how it was. Whereas secondary sources are second-hand accounts that interpret primary sources. So it could be a historian telling you about the primary source. It might be a historian telling you about the weapon that they've got in front of them. But because they are telling you, it becomes a secondary source because if you didn't have the weapon in your hand. Okay? It's a little bit tricky to get your head around, but have a look at these different primary sources and secondary sources and see if you can sort them. Which ones do you think are primary sources and which are secondary? You've got a copy of this in your work pack, and next to it you can write a P or an S, or you can cut them out and stick them into your book into different groups. So pause the video here and you can do that, sort them into primary sources and secondary sources. Okay, did you pause the video and have you sorted out these different primary and secondary sources? How did you get on? Well, the primary sources were a letter from someone involved in Battle of Falkirk, a photograph of the Queen on the day she opened the Scottish Parliament, and a sword from the 1600s. And then these ones were not primary sources. A lecture given in 2018 by a professor of the Victorian period about life in Edinburgh in the 1890s, and textbook for school children about the Roman Empire. So they're both not primary sources because they aren't actually artifacts or sources from that period in time. They are accounts or they're teachings from someone else who's learnt about it and they're telling you more. Whereas the photograph and the letter and the sword are actually sources from that period of history. Okay, so now I'm going to show you two primary sources from a football match, and they're both primary sources because they're accounts of the same football match. Okay, I'll read them out for you. So, our team was definitely better than the green team in the first half. They couldn't keep up with us. We should have had at least 2 penalties, but the referee was clearly on their side. In the second half, their striker got lucky and the ball bounced off him into our net. Our team kept fighting until the end, but we just couldn't quite get a goal back. We were just unlucky. Okay, so that is an account of a football match by a supporter of the blue team. And that supporter was actually there, so it is a primary source. It's his account of how the football match went. But now I'm going to read to you what the supporter of the green team said. What a brilliant game! We deserved the win. Our players completely outplayed them. The referee made some really important decisions in the first half. The blue team thought they deserved a couple of penalties, but their players were just diving. Our striker scored an excellent goal in the second half. Their keeper never saw it coming. After that, their team just gave up. All in all, it was a fantastic win for us. And that was written by a supporter of the green team. So we've got two primary sources there, both of the same football match. One person's giving an account of how they thought it went. They were supporting the blue team. And one person has given an account of how they thought it went, and they were supporting the green team. So both accounts are of the same match. But why are they a bit different? Can you think why they might be a bit different? You can tell the screen. Okay, so when we're thinking about bias, we're thinking about, can we trust what we're being told, or is it being told to us from somebody's point of view? So if I was explaining to you what a sword was like, or if you could look at the sword yourself, well, if I was telling you what the sword was like, that would be from my point of view. It might not be exactly how you might interpret it if you were looking at the sword yourself. Okay, so this is your task for this lesson. You need to write down what a primary source is. You need to write down what a secondary source is. And then the activity from earlier, you needed to write a P or an S, and you're sorting out these things, whether you think they're primary or secondary sources. And then you're going to tell me, are primary or secondary sources more trustworthy? Which are more reliable? Would it be the sword that you had in your hand that you could see for yourself, or would it be reading about it in a book or somebody telling you what they thought it was like? Which is more trustworthy or more reliable? Now, before we go, we've got a little treat for you, because Mr. Matthews and I were in school and we came across these very old log books and old information books all about schools in our area, so in Easton, and schools where before Bannerman Road was there, the school that was there before Bannerman Road, all of the old historical books about the school. So here you can see the box, and they're very old and very tatty, so we needed to be really careful with them. And it's such a shame that we aren't at school to have a look at them with you, but we will do when we go back. And inside here we've got some logbooks, some registers, very old registers, and we've got here this punishment book. You can see there it says punishment book, and this punishment book explains what punishments people were given for misbehaving. So let's have a little look. Here it's telling us what the offence was. So if somebody was disobedient or misconduct, rudeness, fighting, rough play, they slackened, and this is the punishment they were given, 1 or 2 curls. So if you were, where it says you were given a curl, that means you were hit. You might have been given the ruler or the cane and you were hit by your teacher to try and get you to stop misbehaving. So nowadays, is that what Mr. Matthews and I do? If you are not behaving, no, you move your name down, or you might go to partner class, or you might get a yellow slip, but we do not hit you. And that's really interesting that you can find out what punishments used to be given to children by reading in these old books. So that was the punishment book. Here we've got a log book, and inside you can see the details of some of the people that went to the school. And you can see some really old dates written down here. And you can see their names, and you can see some staff as well. It says staff, and I think that when they were crossed out must have been when they left. But you can see that somebody was born in the 1900s there. If you want to pause the video and see if you can work out what these say, you can do that, but it is a bit tricky because their writing is fading, and also it's very loopy. I find it a bit difficult to read. Here we've got a log of what was happening at school in 1932, moving on to 1933. So you can see here that on the 22nd of December 1932, school finished at 2:30 p.m. On the 11th of January 1933, school began, and Miss Jones is attending a physical training class every Wednesday afternoon during this term. So a head teacher arrived at 11 a.m, permission given. So lots of different information, which nowadays we would record that on the computer, and the staff in the office would be recording things, but in those days there weren't computers, so they were recorded in the books, and the books have been kept. So it's really, really interesting that we can find out information from this. This is a primary source because it's an actual book, a log book of what was happening on these days. And it's there at school, so we'll be able to have a look at it ourselves, and they're really, really old books that we've been keeping, and they're kept in this box. Okay, right, there we have it, Year 3, another great lesson. We can't wait to see your work, so don't forget to send it through to Mr. Matthews or to me, and we will hopefully see you again soon. Bye.